Hello everyone, we're continuing with the laws of sitting in the Sukkah. We're on Tafresh Lamates, 639, number 2. Ochlin v'shosin v'yishenim b'sukkah kol shiva yamim, kol shiva, bein b'yom bein b'layla. We eat, drink, and sleep in the Sukkah all 7 days of Sukkot, whether by day or by night. Ve'ein yishenim chutz l'sukkah, afilu shenis arai. And we don't sleep outside the Sukkah, even a little sleep. But one could eat achilas arai outside of the sukkah. Now, what's achilas arai? So he's going to discuss that in greater detail very soon. But achilas arai means you're not having like a fixed meal. When you sit down and have a fixed meal, that has to be in the sukkah. But if you're just taking, a little sip of water or a little snack, that doesn't have to be in the sukkah. Now, certain foods, by definition, they're considered a fixed meal, and we'll see what those are. But so let's continue reading. V'kama achilas arai. What is considered arai? What is considered a non-fixed meal? Kebeya mipast. You eat less than an egg's volume of bread. So that's very little. Once you eat more than an egg's volume of bread, that has to be eaten in the sukkah. Umuter lishtos mayim v'yayin v'le'echol peros v'afilu kava alayu chutz l'sukkah. But you can drink water, wine, and fruit. Even if you're eating a lot of fruit and having a whole meal of fruit, you have like a fruit party, you just sit down with a whole plate of apples and oranges and like things like that you're allowed to eat outside of the sukkah. Those foods, by definition, are not considered foods that you fix a meal on. Now, if we get to it today, we're going to see wine is a little tricky, that if you are actually sitting there and drinking like wine, having like a wine and cheese party, that should actually be done in the sukkah. But we'll see more details when we get to the Mishnah Berurah. Now, somebody who wants to be stringent on himself, and he doesn't even drink water outside of the sukkah, that is praiseworthy. So while one is totally permitted to drink water outside the sukkah, if one tries his best to only drink water, even water in the sukkah, that is praiseworthy. V'tav shel ha'asoi mechamishas minim im kavea alav chashiv keva v'tzarach sukkah. Now, if one has a dish from the 5 grains, right, the 5 different types of grains that bread products are made from, like wheat, spelt, oats, barley, missing one, but those types of foods, and you are having a fixed meal on it, that has to be rye. I didn't mention rye. That has to be eaten in the sukkah. So so bread and cake, things like that. And we'll see how much cake. Can you have a little bite of cake outside the sukkah? So hopefully we'll get to that in the Mishnah Berurah. So that was the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Ramah, Uma shenogim lahakel achshav b'sheina she'ein yishenim b'sukkah rak hamedaktikim b'mitzvos. He says we find now that only the people that are careful with mitzvos sleep in the sukkah. Why is that? Why? What's the reason for that? Many say that the reason that people don't sleep in the sukkah is because it's very cold, it's very uncomfortable. Right? We have a concept in the laws of sukkah that if it's distressful to sit in the sukkah, for example, if it's raining, one is not required to eat in the sukkah. Even the Shulchan Aruch actually calls someone a hedyot who eats in the sukkah when it's raining. Hedyot would translate in English as idiot, or simpleton is a nicer way to translate hedyot. So in general, if one is pained, it's difficult. There's an objective physical thing. It doesn't mean you're the type of person that gets like, oh, it's like a little chilly. It's 67 degrees, it's not 68, so I have to eat inside. No, if it's an objective thing, like rain's coming down and you're trying to eat your meal and the rain's going into your challah and your soup, then you can go inside. So he's saying here that perhaps the reason that people don't sleep in the sukkah, except for those that are careful of mitzvahs, maybe the reason is because it's very cold. But the Ramah says that's not the reason. He doesn't like that reason. He says, V'li nira, it appears to me the reason is, Mishum de mitzvah sukkah ishu beso. Ish v'ishto kederach shehu derech v'ishto kederach shehu derech kol hashana. So he says that the mitzvah of sukkah, as we mentioned last time, is you dwell in a sukkah the way that you dwell in your house. So he writes, during the year, a man sleeps in the same room as his wife. So people, he says, don't sleep in the sukkah because they want to sleep with their wives. They want to be with their wives. So that is the reason why they don't sleep in the sukkah, because you have to dwell in the sukkah the way you do the whole year, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to sleep in the sukkah with your wife. So obviously this would only apply to married people. But then he writes, "V'makom shelo yuchol lishon im ishto she'ein lo sukkah miyuchades pater." He says, and therefore, if you don't have a sukkah where you and your wife could stay together, then you don't have to sleep in the sukkah. But then he writes, "V'tov lahachmer v'lios sham im ishto kemoshehu dar kol hashana im efshar lios l'sukkah miyuchades." However, if it's possible, what you should do is you should have a special sukkah where you and your wife can sleep there. This way, you could both sleep in the sukkah and fulfill the mitzvah. So, according to the Ramah, there is a leniency not to sleep in a sukkah for a married man. Okay, let's do a little bit of the Mishnah Berurah. There's a lot here, a lot of details to discuss what we just read, but let's start a little bit what the Mishnah Berurah says. So, Kol Shiva Ayin L'Kaman Siman Tov Rishon Meches Arai. We mentioned before that you're not even allowed to sleep, take a little nap outside the sukkah. The pa'amim desagi le'inish b'hachi v'havale keva, because sometimes you could have even a short sleep can reinvigorate you. So, since it had such an effect, it's considered a fixed amount of sleep, and therefore that should be in the sukkah. V'ayin siman memdalet shehushir hiluch kuf ama. But he says, he says, perhaps if you're sleeping for less than the time it takes to walk 100 amos, then that's so short, then you're allowed to sleep that outside the sukkah. Now, the time it takes to walk 100 amos, an amma is like a foot and a half. So we're talking 150 feet. So the time it takes to walk 150 feet is not too long. So there are people that could like nod off for, like 10 seconds and like a minute. So I guess if you can do that, maybe you can do that outside of the sukkah. But I know I for sure can't do that. But, so the general rule is any sleep is supposed to be done inside the sukkah. Someone who, let's say someone just fell asleep outside of the sukkah. As soon as he gets up, he should go to the sukkah and then fall asleep there. Because we said in another case that if you are up and you haven't gone to bed yet and it was raining in the sukkah, then the rain stops, then you have to go to sleep in the sukkah. And we have a lot more to discuss in the Mishnah Berurah about what we learned, but just to summarize that the mitzvah of sukkah is like we have to do what we would usually act in our houses. So we eat in the sukkah any fixed meal means usually bread, if like cake, things made from the 5 grains, cookies, cake that you make a mizonos bracha on. But if you're just having like a quick apple or a drink of water, that doesn't have to be in the sukkah, but it is praiseworthy to even eat that in the sukkah. One should sleep in the sukkah, but if one's married, according to the Ramah, there is a leniency. So next time, God willing, we'll talk a little bit about these other issues, about making a bracha when you eat in the sukkah, making a blessing, and wine. We're going to talk more about wine, because that could be a little different depending on the amount of wine you drink. We'll soon see. But when deciding there's always two issues to decide, which we'll discuss, God willing, next time. Is one, do I need to eat this food in the sukkah? Is there a mitzvah to eat this food in the sukkah? And number two, do I make a blessing when I eat this food in the sukkah? So hopefully we will discuss that during Sukkot, and wishing everybody a good Yontif.